The moment the girl's small hands began moving in the air, it became painfully obvious that nobody around her had any idea what she was trying to say. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the enormous ballroom, casting warm golden light across polished marble floors and expensive gowns that whispered as people moved. Waiters carried silver trays filled with sparkling glasses, and laughter drifted through the hall like music. It was the kind of place where wealth felt normal and kindness sometimes felt rare. At the far corner near a tall marble column stood a young girl in a pale green dress, her fingers moving quickly, her eyes searching every face around her as if hoping someone might finally understand. No one did. People smiled politely at first, then awkwardly looked away. Some guests pretended to check their phones. Others shifted their bodies so they wouldn't have to face her confusion. The girl's hands slowly stopped moving, and the hopeful light in her eyes dimmed just a little more. Have you ever watched someone trying desperately to be heard while the whole world quietly ignores them? Imagine standing in a crowded room, surrounded by voices and laughter, yet trapped in a silence so thick it presses against your chest. What would you do? Would you try harder to speak, or would you eventually stop trying at all? Across the ballroom, a woman named Rachel noticed the moment the girl lowered her hands. Rachel had arrived late to the charity gala, still slightly out of breath from rushing through traffic and trying to smooth the wrinkles from her simple navy dress in the car mirror. She didn't belong among billionaires and executives, and she knew it. Her invitation had come through the small nonprofit she volunteered for, and walking into the ballroom had felt like stepping into a different universe. But Rachel had always been the kind of person who watched people closely. Maybe it came from years of working at a community center, or maybe it was simply the way her heart worked. And right now, her attention was locked on the lonely girl by the column. The child looked no older than 9. Her hair was neatly tied back, and her dress was elegant, but the sadness on her face was impossible to hide. Her hands rested awkwardly at her sides now, as if she had already learned that trying to communicate here was pointless. Rachel followed the girl's gaze across the ballroom until she noticed a tall man speaking with several investors near the stage. He stood confidently in a charcoal suit, his posture straight and commanding. People leaned toward him when he spoke. Waiters rushed when he lifted a hand. Every person in the room seemed to know exactly who he was. His name was Jonathan Hale. One of the richest men in the country. Founder of a massive technology company. And, as Rachel suddenly realized, the father of the silent girl standing alone. The realization hit Rachel quietly but deeply. While hundreds of people surrounded the man, his daughter stood invisible just 20 feet away. Rachel watched as the girl looked again toward her father. For a moment hope flickered across her face, but Jonathan remained deep in conversation, nodding politely while someone else spoke about investment portfolios and global expansion. The girl's shoulders slowly slumped. Rachel felt something twist painfully inside her chest. The truth was obvious. Everyone in the room respected Jonathan Hale. They admired his success, his money, his power. But his daughter, they didn't know what to do with her. Because she was deaf. And in a world built on loud voices and fast conversations, silence made people uncomfortable. Rachel took a slow breath. Memories surfaced in her mind without warning. A small classroom years ago. A little boy named Aaron struggling to communicate while other kids laughed. The hours Rachel had spent learning sign language just so he could finally have someone who understood him. She had never expected that skill to matter tonight. But suddenly it did. Across the room, the girl lifted her hands again, hesitating before signing something slowly to a passing woman. The woman blinked in confusion, smiled stiffly, then walked away. The girl's hands dropped again. Rachel didn't think anymore. She simply started walking. Each step across the ballroom felt strangely loud in her ears. Conversations blurred into distant noise. She noticed curious glances from guests wondering who this woman was and where she was going. But Rachel only focused on the girl. When she finally reached her, the child looked up cautiously, her expression guarded the way children's faces become when disappointment happens too often. Rachel crouched slightly so their eyes were level. For a brief moment she just smiled gently. Then she lifted her hands and signed. "Hello." The effect was immediate. The girl's eyes widened so suddenly it was as if someone had turned the lights on inside her soul. Her hands rose almost instinctively, trembling with excitement. "You understand me?" Rachel nodded softly and signed back. "Yes. I understand you." The girl's face broke open with emotion so pure it made Rachel's chest ache. Her fingers began moving quickly now, words spilling out in a silent rush that carried weeks, maybe months, of loneliness. "My name is Sophia. Everyone talks but nobody listens. They smile but they don't know what I'm saying." Rachel listened carefully, answering with slow, patient movements of her hands. "My name is Rachel. I'm glad you came to talk to me." Sophia's smile grew wider than Rachel thought possible. And for the first time that night, the child no longer looked invisible. Across the ballroom, Jonathan Hale noticed something strange. His daughter was laughing. Not the polite smile she usually forced at events like this, but a real laugh that lifted her shoulders and filled her eyes with light. Jonathan turned slightly, trying to see who she was interacting with. Then he saw Rachel. A woman he didn't recognize. Standing calmly in the middle of the ballroom, her hands moving in smooth, confident motions as Sophia answered with excited signs. Jonathan froze. For a moment he simply watched. Sophia had struggled at social events ever since her mother passed away 3 years earlier. The loss had wrapped itself around the girl like a quiet storm. Jonathan had tried everything: special tutors, the best schools, private therapists, but nothing seemed to break through the isolation she felt among strangers. But now, she looked alive. Rachel and Sophia continued signing, their silent conversation flowing naturally. Rachel asked about the girl's favorite subjects, her hobbies, the books she loved. Sophia's hands moved faster and faster as her excitement grew. She spoke about drawing, about wanting to design buildings one day, about how loud the ballroom looked even though she couldn't hear it. Rachel laughed softly and told her that sometimes loud rooms made hearing people tired too. Sophia's shoulders relaxed. For the first time that night, she felt normal. Jonathan slowly stepped away from the investors surrounding him. Their voices faded as he walked across the ballroom, his eyes never leaving the scene unfolding before him. Guests began noticing. Conversations softened. Curious eyes followed the billionaire as he approached his daughter and the mysterious woman speaking her language. Rachel noticed him only when Sophia's gaze shifted over her shoulder. The girl signed quickly. "That's my dad." Rachel turned. Jonathan Hale stood just a few feet away now, his expression difficult to read. For a long moment he didn't speak. His eyes moved from Rachel to Sophia and back again. Then he noticed Rachel's hands still gently poised, ready to continue signing. Something in his expression softened. Rachel offered a polite nod. Jonathan looked at his daughter. Sophia was glowing with happiness. And in that moment, something heavy and quiet cracked inside his heart. He had built companies, launched satellites, negotiated billion-dollar deals. But somehow, he had failed to build a bridge to his own daughter. He cleared his throat softly. Rachel watched his lips move, but Sophia didn't need to hear the words to know what he was asking. She quickly signed the message for her father. "He's asking how you know sign language." Rachel answered through Sophia's hands. "I used to teach at a community center. One of my students was deaf. I learned so he wouldn't feel alone." Sophia relayed the message. Jonathan looked down at his daughter, then back at Rachel again. Gratitude flickered across his face in a way that wealth could never manufacture. The room around them slowly returned to its usual rhythm of music and conversation, but something had quietly shifted. A small connection had been made. And sometimes the smallest connections change everything. Rachel continued talking with Sophia for nearly an hour. They discussed art, architecture, dreams, and silly things like how people looked when they tried to dance at fancy parties. Sophia laughed so much that several guests began glancing over, curious about the silent joy happening in that corner of the room. Jonathan stayed nearby the entire time, watching. Not as a billionaire. Just as a father. And the more he watched, the more he realized how deeply his daughter had needed someone like Rachel. Because communication wasn't just about words. It was about being seen. About being understood. About someone caring enough to meet you in your world instead of expecting you to fight your way into theirs. Eventually the evening began winding down. Guests collected coats and exchanged final handshakes. Sophia looked disappointed. Rachel noticed immediately. "Will you come again someday?" Sophia signed hesitantly. Rachel smiled warmly. "Of course." Jonathan stepped forward then, his voice quiet but sincere as Sophia interpreted through her hands. He explained that Rachel had given his daughter something priceless tonight. And he asked if she might consider visiting their home sometime, perhaps even helping Sophia with sign language and conversation. Rachel hesitated for only a second. Then she nodded. Because sometimes kindness opens doors that money never could. And over the next several months, Rachel became a regular presence in the Hale household. She didn't arrive with fancy credentials or expensive plans. She simply came with patience, understanding, and the quiet belief that every child deserves to be heard. Sophia flourished. Her confidence grew. Her laughter returned. She began sharing her drawings again, filling sketchbooks with imaginative buildings and bright cityscapes. Even Jonathan began learning sign language slowly, awkwardly, determined to speak with his daughter in the language she understood best. The process wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. His hands fumbled. Sometimes Sophia giggled at his clumsy attempts. But every effort mattered. Because love, like language, grows stronger the more you practice it. Years later, long after that first night in the glittering ballroom, people would look at Sophia Hale and see a confident young woman presenting her architectural designs to packed conference rooms. They would admire her intelligence and creativity. But few would know that everything began with a single moment. One woman noticing a silent child. One simple decision to step forward instead of looking away. And a pair of hands rising gently into the air to say the words that changed a life. "Hello. I understand you." Before the story ends, tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone being quietly ignored and wished you had the courage to step forward and help? Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the loudest voice in someone's silent world. And if this story truly touched your heart, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people can be reminded that compassion still has the power to change lives. Heavy Black Heart.